Hello everyone and welcome to this presentation. My name is Tariq Naous and I'll be presenting to you our demo paper on clustering plotted data by image segmentation. So first of all, I've included a couple of useful links on this slide. First of all, the link to our paper, which is on the CVF repository, which you can download from there. We also have a link for our demo, which is hosted on the Hugging Face Spaces, where you can try out our method and play around with some parameters. And I've also included the link to our GitHub repository where you can find both the source code and some instructions on how to install this package and use the algorithm very easily in an off-the-shelf manner. So what we propose in this paper is actually a new way to cluster data, which we call visual clustering. So the classical clustering algorithms actually are based on either distances or density or something else. However, this might be too slow to compute when the number of samples in our datasets are very large. So we actually follow a different approach that is inspired by how humans cluster data, which is by visually inspecting the plot of the data and then forming rough groups. So visual clustering applies the same idea. We start off by our dataset, we plot it inside a 2D plot and create a matrix from this. And then we treat this as an image that we feed to our binary segmentation model, which is a pre-trained unit that we pre-train on synthetic datasets of blobs of this same shape that you see here. This will give us a predicted mask, which identifies where we do have clusters and where we don't. And this is followed by 2 steps of instance separation based on connected component analysis and watershed. And this will give us a label map per instance. And finally, we assign clusters to points based on where they fall in each instance region. So we finally get our clustered data, and then the main idea here is that we leverage the fast inference time of the pre-trained neural network, and this helps us overcome computational issues when we want to compute something like density or distance. You may be wondering whether this approach only works on datasets of blob-shaped clusters, since we pre-trained the network on only these types of shapes. However, this is not true because we tested it on different patterns and we saw that it can generalize actually to whatever data pattern shape that we have. So you can see here in this first column the results of visual clustering, which is perfectly in line with what the human intuition of clustering would be, which is assigning clusters to actually groups that are disconnected from each other. And this is also verified by the adjusted mutual information score that we get, which is almost perfect for all of the patterns, compared to something like k-means clustering, which for some patterns doesn't make sense because it's like based on distance. So this might not actually be good. And be compared to many other classical algorithms. So you can notice that the only two that achieve the similar results of visual clustering are both agglomerative clustering and dbScan. However, these two do not scale very well to very large datasets, and this would be where the computational advantage of visual clustering would come into place, because we cannot actually use agglomerative clustering or dbScan when we have a lot of samples. So it would be a really large computational time. So this table shows running time comparisons when we increase the number of samples for the different algorithms. So visual clustering takes 0.2 seconds for 10K samples and 14 seconds for 2 million samples, compared with something like agglomerative clustering, which takes 39 seconds for 100K samples and goes above 3 minutes, which is denoted here by infinity when we go beyond like 500K samples. The same for dbScan, but a bit less aggressive. It takes 52 seconds compared to visual clustering, which takes 14 seconds on 2 million datasets, 2 million samples. So it's as fast as the fastest classical algorithms such as k-means clustering or Gaussian mixture, but at the same time it gives us more clustering results that are more in line with the human intuition as seen in the previous slide. So although visual clustering did extremely well on the synthetic data sets that we saw. One drawback it has that when applying it to real-world data sets is that usually real-world data sets, as you can see here in the first two figures, are very noisy, and mostly clusters are not disconnected, but there's a lot of points between them, and this is where it would be difficult to use the segmentation model followed by instance separation as is, because basically if we have connections between clusters, it would basically set the whole data set as just one cluster. So this is why we introduce two optional steps of first denoising the input, which helps us emphasize high density regions in the image as follows. So we eliminate the noise, and then we perform the main steps of visual clustering, which is segmentation. And once we have the clusters that we want, we then apply a max filter on the a max filtering operation on the resulting label map, and this will expand on our points compared to something like k-means clustering, where we would have to specify the number of clusters that we want to cluster. But we still do have some points that are very far from certain clusters that do not get assigned to any cluster. So this might be good or might be bad depending on whether the data actually has outliers or not. So in case it does have outliers and we don't want to assign them to any clusters, then that would be great. And if not, then we can just assign them to the nearest cluster that we have after performing all of these operations. And of course, the size of the kernel in both the denoising filter and the max filter as pre-processing and post-processing steps are something that should be played around with based on the user's view of the dataset and how it should be clustered to get the most optimal results that they want. Of course, we provide a very easy to use off-the-shelf implementation of the algorithm, and all you need to do is just pip install visual-clustering, and this will install the source code on your machine, and then you can directly use the algorithm as follows here. So you just import the visual clustering class and create an instance of it, which is your model, and you can define the parameter, which is the median filter size and the max filter size. By default, they're set to 1, which doesn't have any effect, but you can experiment with different values and see what works best for your dataset. And the link to the full instructions are on our GitHub repo, where we also have the source code written in Python in case you want to further expand on this project. So once you've created your model, you can easily fit it on your data. All you need to do is pass your two-dimensional data to the fit function. So here we're using just synthetic data sets. Or you can just pass your high-dimensional dataset after reducing it to 2 dimensions via your favorite dimensionality reduction technique. And this will return the cluster labels for your datasets after running through our method. So it's as simple as that, and it runs exactly the way that classical clustering algorithms work in the scikit-learn implementation. And finally, once you have these labels, you can just visualize the resulting clusters. As we can see here, we have perfectly clustered blobs. And if you want to run this example inside a Colab notebook, I've included a link here below, which you can go to and try it out for yourself. And don't forget to try out our demo on synthetic data, which we have hosted in this link on the Hugging Face Spaces, where you can actually select the cluster type that you want, either blobs or moon-shaped patterns, select the number of clusters that you want, how many samples you want in this dataset, play around with parameters for the denoising filter and the max filtering operations, and you can change the random state to change the location of the clusters, and you can just submit to see the results. So thanks so much for following through in these slides. I hope that you found this work interesting to you, and feel free to reach out to me on my Twitter or LinkedIn or via email. I'm always happy to connect and collaborate on projects. So thank you very much.